Hello, everybody. So I finished the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC. I beat the final boss. I beat all the major optional bosses except for Jory, Elder Inquisitor, and Lord of Frenzied Flame. That's not because I was ignoring them or I rage quit them. I just didn't run across them as I was going through the DLC. On the whole, I would say that the DLC was excellent. It was really, really good. I had a couple minor issues with it, which we'll get to in a second. But first, I'd just like to give some praise to FromSoft. As a company, I think that they've grown enormously, especially since Dark Souls 1. If anyone who played Dark Souls 1 on PC knows, it was a complete and total disaster. You had to install a mod to even play it. It was janky. I think you could only roll in four directions. The hitboxes were terrible. It was clunky. The balancing, there was no balancing, although that was kind of a fun part of it. It was just the bugs were crazy. Now, in most FromSoft games, I've fallen through walls or gotten stuck on objects or something, but Dark Souls 1 really took that to a whole other level. Likewise with Dark Souls 2, a little better, a little more clean, but you had that stupid bug on PC where weapons degraded like 2 to 4 times faster than they were supposed to. It took them a while to fix that. Dark Souls 3, even more polished, but you had poises working as intended, and they messed that up. And on the whole, I'd say they were continually improving. I'd say it was very much a 2 step forward, 1 step back thing. I think with Elden Ring, though, it really showed their maturity as a company. I think it was a much more polished product. There wasn't near. I found some glitches, but not nearly as many. Just everything about it seemed a lot more. I don't know if streamline's the right term. I don't want to use a term other than just professional, but hopefully you know what I mean by that. Like everything was very consistent. The weapon balancing seemed to have been thought out. The spell balancing seemed to have been thought out a lot more in advance. With a couple exceptions, the bosses I think were a lot more fair than they have been in some previous games. I might do another boss tier list at some point, but I think there's FromSoft bosses that are tough but fair, or brutally difficult, but I don't think are necessarily, like I said, unfair. Like I'd say, like the Fume Knight is about as hard as a boss can get without me calling it like an unfair boss fight. Stuff like Artorias or Lothric and Lorien, or even Soul of Cinder, because I can't parry, or what I'd say are hard bosses, but very fair. And if you put in the effort, it's not super difficult. You can get past them. And then there's just some bosses that I think are just a lot of fun. And honestly, Elden Ring had a lot of that. I loved Godfrey First Elden Lord / Horalu. That was an amazing boss battle. Radon, the first time you fight him, is one of my favorite boss battles throughout it. Morgott was really good. Generally speaking, I feel like the bosses were much more polished than they were in previous games. There was not that many cases where they just had some insane attack that one hit killed you. Some of them had like the thing where you enter the boss arena and then they just fly across the arena and kill you. But with the exception of maybe like Melania, and I would say Radon in the DLC, most of the bosses were pretty fair. Also, I think in this one, compared to the previous ones, and this is something I also noticed a lot in Armor Core, they balanced the various playstyles out. And this is kind of an issue I had with DS2 and especially DS3, where they just nerfed armor into oblivion to the point where it just kind of sucked, and tank builds weren't viable anymore like they were in DS1. And the game was very, I feel, pushing in kind of a Bloodborne direction where you're supposed to be a Dex character who constantly dodges and does hit and run and stuff like that. And I think there's a lot of elitism in kind of the FromSoft fan base that if you're not doing like Soul Level 1 with no armor, like a Dex build, you're playing the game wrong and you're not legitimately beating it. I feel like in Elden Ring they made most play styles viable. I play a tank great shield build with face spliced in for buffs, and I found that worked really well. From what I've seen, casters work well, dex builds work well, pure faith builds work well. It just seems like they made everything viable, so there's a lot more freedom. And I especially found when I was facing bosses, something I appreciate a lot is you could move your equipment around and it would make an actual difference. Armor's good now. If you want to go get like a specific resistance or raise your defense or something, that actually helps out a lot. So I like that a lot about this game. Because to me, that's what I've always been. I'm not the best when it comes to like reaction time or anything, but I can make up for that a lot in Soulsborne or Souls games by getting better equipment, coming up with my own like play style, my own builds, and adjusting when I'm fighting bosses. And to me, that's kind of the most rewarding aspect of it. That even if you aren't that good at it, it's still possible to get through the game. It's often kind of a case of working smarter, not harder. And I think also I just want to give a lot of praise for Fires of Rubicon. So I complain a lot about these games as I'm playing through them. I think that's pretty normal. The fact that I play basically every FromSoft game that gets released that I have access to, I think says how I feel about the company as a whole. But Fires of Rubicon, I have to give them credit. I think that was the most polished product they've ever done. Like, the graphics were amazing, the voice acting was amazing, the interface was really good, they had a pause button. Like I said, it was similar to Elden Ring. They really embraced the whole, and I get that this is how Armor Core traditionally worked, but they really embraced the whole customization, the play it your own way. If you want to do a dex build or like a light build, that's fine. If you want to do a mid build or you want to do a heavy build and just charge things with dual Gatling guns and dual songbirds, you can do that too. And there's, generally speaking, some sort of workaround when you're fighting bosses, which once again is good for people like me who aren't very skilled at these games. And I feel Shadow of the Erdtree really brought all that together. Now, firstly, I'm going to give FromSoft the credit for not trolling us again like they did with the Dark Souls 3 DLC. For Dark Souls 3 DLC, everyone's like, oh, it's going to be Londor, it's going to be the Abyss, it's going to be... And they had all these ideas of like what it was going to be, and then they gave us Ashes of Andariel, which I thought was really bad. I think there was only like, 2 or 3 bosses in it. The map was small and not very inspiring. I get that the last boss battle was pretty cool, but that didn't make up for what I would consider to be a pretty bad DLC as a whole. Ring City, I didn't particularly like. I found the difficulty a bit high compared to a lot of other things I've played. I really hated the Demon Princes. And once again, I just feel like it's unnecessary. Like, did we really... It just kind of felt like a random side trip, whereas we could have explored something else from the lore and maybe answered some more questions. So I'm happy with this one. Someone had made a joke that the DLC was going to be the Painted World of Rykard. But no, they actually took what was like the biggest mystery and the biggest bait in the game, Mikola's egg or cocoon behind Moog, and that's the DLC. And so they delivered basically exactly what people wanted and exactly what was broadcast. And they delivered in a big way. They basically provided you a whole game's worth of content. So the DLC map on the whole, here's kind of my first issue with it. While the environments are gorgeous and I love the architecture, I love the design, I love kind of the Twilight feel. It reminds me a bit of Twilight Princess, actually. I didn't really like the map that much because I found that they tried to be too clever with navigating it. Like, a lot of the time to get down to like canyons or get to specific areas, you had to go through like tunnels or like... There's a lot of the stuff in this one more so I find than most Soulsborne games where you have to... Like, if you miss a particular ladder or a particular turn, like half the game is that way, and it can be hard. I found even using a guide when I got stuck, it was kind of hard to even know what to look up because it's not like in the base game things I think are more straightforward. So I could look at a guide and go, okay, so it's the entrance is here. That's where I need to go. And once again, I'm sure a lot of people like that. For me personally, I just got frustrated trying to figure out how to get down from locations, trying to figure out how to get up to locations, stuff like that. Like trying to fight the Mother of Fingers, you have to get down to the finger ruins in the upper right-hand corner of the map. And I just spent a really long time until a friend of mine's like, no, you're supposed to use the Mother gesture. And that opens up the America statue or whatever. And then like stuff like the specimen storehouse is cool, but I found it kind of miserable just because like the platforming in this game is better. I don't think it's great, but it's better. I just kind of got lost and confused as to where I was supposed to go in it. And once again, that might just be on me, but I feel like compared to Elden Ring base game and the other like Souls games, this one was a lot more complex. And once again, I'm sure a lot of people like that, but for me, I think they just kind of went a bit too far. And there were large portions of the DLC where I just had no idea where I was supposed to go. So that is a criticism from me. On the whole, though, I'd say the legacy dungeons were just as good, if not better. They're really starting to feel like Zelda dungeon. Maybe not quite Zelda dungeon tier, just because you don't have some of the movement things, but they felt very balanced, very fair. I didn't die too many times from the platforming, which is saying something. But they just felt, once again, this is a lot cleaner and more polished. And though part of me misses the jank that was DS1, where you could get the Dark Knight halberd like at the beginning of the game and you could just coast through it because it was so overpowered. I'm kind of grateful that they're trying a bit harder to make a more kind of uniform gameplay experience. I will say, and maybe this is like this isn't necessarily a complaint, it's more like constructive criticism, I guess you could say. I think they went a bit overboard with new stuff. Maybe like what they're trying to do with this is just test a bunch of things out for whatever their next game is going to be. But I feel like they added too many new weapon types in, too many spells, too many talismans, stuff like too many just weapons in general. And maybe that's kind of a weird criticism to make. I just felt like you were getting a new spell like every 10 minutes or something. And there's just so many of them relative to the length of the DLC. Like, I know it's not the case, but it felt like there was more spells in this than there was in the base game. At least in terms of like relative to its size. It kind of got a bit overwhelming at points. Just because you were getting so many new talismans, you were getting so many new spells, all that kind of stuff, and I wasn't even sure like which ones to use, how to try them out. And even if you do find one you like, I don't think it's really you have that much time to use it in this thing. So I just, once again, that's not really a criticism per se. I just think it's, or not a complaint, it's more of a just, I think if they're going to do this again, I would prefer if they spread it out a bit more. And I get that this is the DLC and they're not going to have another DLC, so they can't really spread it out. But it would have been nice if about a third to a half of the new stuff was just in the base game. Because it just got a little over the top. Once again, that's not bad. More choice is good, but it can be a little bit overwhelming. And it feels a little bit less of a reward if it's just like every corpse has a talisman. Once again, you had a good variety of gameplay. There was like vertical levels. I thought the ruin level where you're on Torrent was really cool. That felt a lot like a Zelda dungeon, or it actually reminded me of kind of some of the levels in Pokemon Legends Arceus. Let's maybe talk about the difficulty. The fact that I haven't gone to the difficulty yet is a good sign. So I didn't really find it that much more difficult than the base game, to be honest. But I don't gimp myself the way some people do. So I use like max upgraded weapons. I look up like boss damage types and stuff like that. I use summons. And I used all the Shadow Tree fragments that I came across. So I actually didn't find it particularly hard. If anything, I found it easier than the base game. because I find in these games, like I said, it's very build dependent, and I have a build that's very optimized against fighting bosses. So I found most of the bosses relatively easy. The one I actually had the most trouble with, which is probably going to seem weird to people, was Putrescent Knight. Just because my build is very close range and tanky, and bosses that just move around a lot can be kind of difficult for me. Um, Also, the Shadow Tree avatar was also I found pretty difficult, and that was kind of a miserable experience. I mean, it wasn't the worst, but once again, it's an enemy who just runs away constantly. I kind of feel any boss fight where the enemy runs away, you should be able to use Torrent. The fact that they realized they screwed up with the Elden Beast and you can now fight him on Torrent, I think indicates that they kind of realized that. Now, as for Radon, it's kind of baffling to me that he's the final boss. I mean, the DLC very much felt like Mesmer was the big bad, that he was the central character of it more than Mikola. But you fight him, like, what, halfway through the DLC, and that's a really cool boss fight. But once he's dead, it's just kind of like, okay, what's next? And then you come to the final boss, and it's Radon, and I'm just like, why? It feels like an act of desperation. It feels like an ass pull. It reminds me of Rise of Skywalker when they brought Palpatine back. Because the movie series was garbage. No one wanted to watch it. So they're just like, okay, what we're going to do is we're just going to bring back, everyone likes Palpatine, everyone likes Ian McDermott. We're going to put him in, we're going to put him in the trailer, and people are going to watch it. And it felt like that with Radon, where it was like, okay, people love Radon. That was everyone's favorite boss fight. Everybody loves him. We're just going to bring Radon back. And he's going to be the final boss. And I was just like, well, why? It doesn't really make a lot of sense. Maybe it does in terms of lore, but I don't get why. But it screams of desperation. And there was no real need for them to be desperate. No one thought that there was any real problems. I mean, I had some issues with the story in the base game, but Elden Ring was extremely well received. This DLC was super hyped. There wasn't really a need to desperately pull out a popular character from the base game as like some way of trying to grab people's attention. A friend of mine has said it would have made more sense if Godwyn was the final boss, and Mikola had resurrected him, because Godwyn's been built up a lot, but I don't think we've really fought him. That would have been cool. That would have been very full circle and thematically relevant, because his death set off this whole thing. So him coming back, I think, would be good resolution. But Radon, why is Radon even there? Like it's just really weird. Or even bringing Melania back or something. It's strange. While it wasn't a bad boss fight, I think it was kind of gimmicky. I hated that stupid attack he did where he did the meteor falling star attack. It took me a while to figure out how to get past that and how to dodge it. But I don't know. I kind of hate gimmick attacks like that. I guess it was kind of cool, but that's an issue. Also, the Mikola grab is really annoying. I only died to it once directly, but I died a bunch of times because I was trying to use the talisman. And this is probably the most aggressive, intense boss fight, maybe in any FromSoft game. And getting the time to use a slow-use talisman, Mikola's Great Rune, is difficult. It's a challenge, and it kind of felt cheap to me when I died a couple of times to that. Also, the ending's kind of a letdown. You get like a short memory. There's not some like big grand ending. It just kind of stops, which I guess maybe lore-wise it makes sense, but it kind of felt like a letdown. Like the boss was cool. It didn't really feel like the final boss of a game the same way that some of the previous bosses have. Like Gwyn felt very much like the final boss. Whole story revolves around him. You're taking his place. Thematically great, really cool environment, makes sense. A lot of people complained about the final boss in DS2 being the Chandra, and I would agree with that. It did not really feel like a final boss. It felt like the boss you fight before the final boss. Burnt Ivory King felt way more like a final boss. That was good. Soul of Cinder is pretty much the perfect final boss for the Souls series. Slave Knight Gale, if I can do a slight aside, I like how someone described it. It kind of is the essence of the series. You're two just nobodies fighting each other in the middle of nowhere, like in the middle of a deserted field, over the last scraps of what's left, over like the last waifu too. And that's just kind of what it is. It's just two random assholes going at it over nothing. And that's kind of the core theme of the series. Elden Beast and Radagon of the Golden Order, also great final bosses. So it's just, why? Like, why did they decide to do this and make Radahn the final boss? Why didn't they have Godwin? Why didn't they do anything else? I just, it's so strange to me. Once again, it's not like it's bad. It's just everything else went so well, and they're like, okay, we need to bring this character back because otherwise people are going to want to play the DLC. And it's like, but the DLC was super highly anticipated. People wanted it. People were hyped for it. But on the whole, I have those couple issues, but I think the DLC shows FromSoft's maturity as a company. Now, I'm not going to really talk about the lore because I don't find the lore for Elden Ring that interesting. I'm not saying it's like bad or anything, but I love the Dark Souls lore. In Elden Ring, I just didn't really care, other than it was made for cool set pieces. On the whole, though, excellent DLC. I'm hyped to see what FromSoft comes up with next. I have a lot of faith in the company. Not only have they made good games in the past, but they continue to do a good balance of innovation and having things familiar. And their production quality has scaled pretty consistently with their success. So hopefully they'll keep making games of the same quality, and we'll keep enjoying them for many years to go.